hell? Apologies for that. That was kind of strange. Not sure why my camera just decided to die out of nowhere. But anyways, welcome everybody to this episode of I would say Cyclones on the I would say Cyclones live on the Voice of College Football Network. I'm your host Levi Stevenson, also the managing editor over at Wide Right and Natty Light. Today we have a fun little deal. We're going to be putting together a tier ranking for all the Big 12 coaches. I am gonna rank Matt Campbell because I think we can do that. If we're not like ranking 1 through 10, I don't think it's a big deal to rank. But we can put tiers in there. We can get a good idea of where everybody fits, I think. So a couple little pieces of housekeeping before we get going. Obviously we would love to have you guys subscribe over on the YouTube channel over at, I would say, the Voice of College Football Network. Actually, let me pull that up here. I can so you guys can at least see what the YouTube page looks like. So there you go. So we've already got a number of these. We put up other video clips throughout the week. Would really appreciate if everybody came over and subscribed. We're starting to get there a little bit. But no, a lot of you like to watch on Twitter, on X, and Twitter, whatever, and would appreciate really if you guys came over to YouTube and subscribed and all that good stuff. Helps us grow the community and all that. And plus, you can always jump in and kind of call into the show. I will post a link actually here to join the StreamYard here in a little bit right now, basically. So that way, during this whole discussion, if you guys want to call in and give your thoughts on a tier ranking that I've just given for something, you are more than welcome to do so. Come in and give your opinion, all that good stuff. So I will put the link in the chat right now over on YouTube. If you're on Twitter, you'll have to go over into YouTube and look at the comments there, and the link to join in on the call-in is right there. So would appreciate if everybody watching on Twitter went over and jumped over and subscribed over on YouTube. That'd be much appreciated. So the next kind of thing we're going to be doing here, like I said, that I kind of mentioned, is we're going to be tier ranking all these Big 12 coaches. For once, there's actually really not a lot going on in the news as far as basketball goes, and spring camp's over. We are truly like now in the, the quote unquote, the off season of college football, where there's just not a lot going on for some, there's nobody in camp. The transfer portal is closed. Coaches are probably right now on a beach. A lot of coaches are probably on a beach somewhere, taking their little vacation that they get after the season's over. So, it's a time of year where there's not a lot going on. So we can take our time and we can do classic sports debate here, where it's just a bunch of random opinions about nothing and that are usually not that well justified, but we're going to do our best here. So if anyone's never seen a tier list, we've got it ranked A, B, C, D. I've got Scott Frost at the bottom. Just a little spoiler alert there. This is not necessarily, I'm not going to necessarily rank them within the tiers and say like, oh, in the first person in tier B is the best tier B coach or anything like that. I'm just going to put them into their bin. The way we can kind of define this is that, so tier A is the cream of the crop of the conference. Self-explanatory. They are the best coaches in the conference based on either resume or what's going on. B is they're good, they're a respected coach, but maybe they need to show just a little bit more to really vault themselves into that tier 1 conversation. C is they're kind of just treading water, they're floating along a little bit, and maybe they could jump up maybe they could jump up 1 tier or something like that, but you're not necessarily incredibly hopeful for that. So it's kind of a we'll have to wait and see type of thing. D tier is this coach is struggling, something's not like something isn't quite looking right. Maybe they're at disadvantage. Maybe they've had just kind of some bad seasons early on, do some various luck or whatever. But in general, not necessarily a favorable look on this coach. Yeah, not necessarily a candidate to get fired, but just a coach that's got a long ways to go to really move up as far as the desirability rankings go. And that's kind of how I want to rank these two is based on it's a combination of what have we seen so far and what do we think we can get from them in the future. Now, what can we get from them in the future is usually a different conversation because there's guys, if you look at and we'll talk about him, a guy like Mike Gundy, who's been there forever. His resume speaks for itself. He has an A tier resume for sure. But going forward, how desirable is he as a coach for, anyone in the conference? We'll have to figure that out. And we'll talk about that a little bit when we get to Mike Gundy. Um, so, that's how I want to do this. For anybody that has seen tier lists before, you'll notice that there is not an S tier at the top there, and that is for a reason. And that is because I believe that S tier is reserved for like guys that are in the conversation as the best coach in college football. Like, and right now, I think you've got like probably one guy in Kirby Smart, maybe a couple other ones, like maybe Dabo, maybe Ryan Day, but otherwise, there's not a lot of I'm leaving the S tier for a type of coach that I don't think is in the conference right now. And I don't think in the F tier I'm going to leave because I don't think there's anybody. I don't know that there's anybody on the chopping block as like this year where like if this year, goes not that well that they're just immediately gone. I don't know that there's anybody in the conference that's in that kind of position necessarily. So to me that's what F tier means is that this coach is literally on the chopping block. They're about ready to get fired if they don't have a better season than they did before. I don't know that there's any coaches in the conference that are in this situation. So I did not put an F tier here. So let's get started. First up is going to be Brent Brennan from Arizona. So Brent Brennan he's going into his second year at Arizona. He came from San Jose State. I think he was a guy that I don't know that a lot of people knew. I don't think a lot of people necessarily knew what to think of him necessarily because they just lost Jed Fish to Washington, and they lost just a pile of players to the portal, and a lot of them followed Jed Fish over to Washington. As a result, they had Noah Fafita last year and Tet McMillan, so they had a couple of really nice players, but otherwise Arizona really struggled last year. And now you lose Tet McMillan. You still have Noah Fafita, but you lose Tet McMillan, who is, arguably, he was certainly in the conversation as the best receiver in college football last year, if not the best one. Though I will say I have a soft spot for Jaden Higgins, obviously, but I think right now, the tricky thing about here is that Arizona is not an easy job. It's a basketball school that, it exists in a state that has some football talent. Arizona, the state has more football talent than I think a lot of people realize. And that like Iowa State has gotten players from there. Brock Purdy is one of them. Eli Sanders out there, who's now, he transferred to UNLV, or he transferred to New Mexico. And then he is transferred to USC, I want to say, but, Iowa State's pulled plenty of guys out of Arizona, and so there's talent there, but Arizona is a basketball school and not necessarily a rich one at that. And it doesn't have a history or like a culture of winning. Right now, they had a couple of good seasons with Jed Fish, but beyond that, Arizona historically is not a good football program, or not a great one. They're an okay program, but not great. They struggled last year and they lost the best receiver in college football. I don't know that anybody expects Arizona to be a power moving forward. Does that mean, I'm not exactly sure where you go from here. If Brent Brennan could absolutely prove me wrong. Maybe Noah Fafita has a Heisman contender caliber season, and Arizona's an 8 or 9 win football team, and all of a sudden this looks great. But then again, even if that happens, you're starting to look at like, well, okay, did they just win because Noah Fafita went crazy, or is Brent Brennan a really good coach? Um, it's pretty early to take a call on this one because we just don't know. But right now, I just don't love the prospect of I don't love the prospect of Arizona going forward with Brent Brennan. I just don't think it's not a name that moves the needle a lot in terms of generating excitement around a program. They didn't do well last year with a couple of great playmakers, and then they lost the best one, and they're not really expected to be much of anything this year. Does that mean he's, I don't think he's on the chopping block. Does that mean he'll be on the chopping block next year? I don't know. Probably not. Typically, you typically coaches at least get, at least get 3 years, unless you're at like a remarkably impatient school like a Tennessee or something like that, where they or like an SEC school where they're gonna come after you if you're not good right away. I just don't see a lot there with Brent Brennan to make me excited about him going forward. So next up is going to be Chris Kleiman with Kansas State. Now, Chris Kleiman before he was at Kansas State was in the lineage of North Dakota State, and came from that program where they just won a ton of games there, won some titles, things like that. Came to Kansas State and pretty much picked up right where Bill Snyder left off. Has put some good teams on the field. They won the Big 12 title in 2022. His resume isn't. I mean, I think this is a guy that he's probably an A tier in this conference. His resume speaks for itself. I mean, he's won a conference title at Kansas State. They've been, I think 9 wins is their lowest season win total with him in Manhattan. That was this past season. I think if there is any question about Chris Kleiman going forward, it's maybe how long he'll be at Kansas State. Is he, because he's in his, I think he's in his late 50s. I want to say, I should actually look this up. How old is Chris Kleiman? Chris Kleiman is where'd he go? He's born in 67. So he's 58 years old. So he's in his late 50s. And you can coach into your 60s. I mean, that's not, and I would assume he will. But he's not a coach that like you're gonna sit there and like wonder where how he's still there 20 years from now. He's not. I don't think he's gonna be Bill Snyder coaching into his 80s. Is he at Kansas State for 5 more years? Is he at Kansas State for 10 more years? I don't know what the answer to that is. But for the duration that Chris Kleiman is there, he will be a good coach. I guess the only thing I think that would peel him away from Kansas State, aside from retirement, would be potentially Iowa coming after him if, whenever Kirk Ferentz decides to hang it up, maybe in the next few years. Whenever Kirk Ferentz decides to hang it up, I would be pretty shocked if Iowa didn't go after Chris Kleiman pretty hard. Could they offer enough to peel him away from Kansas State? I don't know. But I think it's an interesting name to talk about here because, like I said, they've been really good under Chris Kleiman. Matt Campbell's beaten a bunch, but Kansas State's been really good under Chris Kleiman. They, like I said, they picked up right where Bill Snyder left off. Their recruiting is in pretty good shape. They've got their quarterback for the next couple of years, in Avery Johnson. I mean, Chris Kleiman's a pretty safe A tier, I think. He's got the resume to back it up and has done a nice job there in Manhattan so far, and will continue to for at least a while for sure. All right, next up is Dave Aranda at Baylor. So Dave Aranda came. He was the defensive coordinator at LSU during the Ed Orgeron run. He was on the 2019 team that won the national title with Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase and Josh Jefferson and all that. He took over for after Matt Rule left, and he's done an all right job. They did win the Big 12 title in 2021, which is, and I mean, winning a Big 12 title is a big deal. Um, but since then, it hasn't been the smoothest of sailing for Baylor. Um, you know, they've struggled the last year they were fine. But, after winning that 2021 title, they dropped down. They had a 6-7 season in 2022, and then in 2023 they were 3-9. Now last year they rebounded absolutely to an 8-5 record, which is certainly it's good, solid, and respectable. From a 3-9 team up to an 8-5 team. And towards the end of the year, they were a solid football team that actually, just based on conference record, was actually was involved in the really complicated and messy tiebreakers there towards the end of the season. So credit to him there um, for rebounding like that. I think Dave Aranda is a solid coach, um, and he seems like a nice guy. There's a number of reasons that you can have a little multi-year blip like that, where you just you lose some talent. And I know, from what I understand, is that the NIL situation there at the beginning of the NIL era at Baylor was a little tricky for him to navigate. Um, it's a private school, and it's a private school that has some money to back it up. But I think I think their NIL program wasn't awesome to start with, as far as getting off on the right foot. So they struggled a little bit, but they've rebounded. Now we got to see what happens, because he won a title, had a few bad years, and then rebounded last year towards the end of the season. Now, what does Baylor look like going into this year? It seems like they've got a quarterback. Um, we'll see. I think right now, I think it's fine to put Baylor. I think it's fine to put Dave Aranda in the B tier, on the basis, like I said, he won a conference title. Now, a good chunk of that roster was from the carryover from the Matt Rule era. But it wasn't the next year; it was the year after. So that's worthy of note. Um, we'll have to see. We'll have to see. He could, if he puts together some more seasons here. Like next season, if they can go, if they can go if they can go 8-4 in the regular season or better, 9-3 or something like that, then I think he's really flirting with A tier. But just right now, those couple down years have me concerned. Um, just because he started off, Baylor was in a really good spot when he left off. When Matt Rule left, Baylor was in a good spot. So, he took something that was good, and then it went bad, and then now it might be good again, but we're not really sure just yet. So I'm comfortable putting Dave Aranda at the B tier spot. I don't know. We'll see. I'm optimistic that he will be solid going forward, but Baylor is an interesting situation. They're not the only private school in the state. They do have, they had the run under Art Briles, and then they were terrible for a while, and then they had a good few years there under Matt Rule, and then now they're kind of back down. So like Baylor some historical powerhouse. I mean, I think they're over 500 historically, but there was a long stretch there. After they left the Southwest Conference, there was a long stretch where they were one of the worst programs in college football. So it seems like the Baylor athletic program has a little bit more momentum now behind it. After the women have won a couple of national titles, the women's basketball has won a couple of national titles. The men won a national title a few years ago, and football has won a couple of conference titles, things like that. They've got more momentum than they used to, and it sounds like the NIL ship may have been largely righted, but it's hard to tell exactly. So, it's kind of a wait and see. But Dave Aranda is probably the one most primed to jump up into the A tier, I think. Other than there's one other coach on this list that actually there's a couple other ones that I think are on the verge of being up near that A tier. But Dave Aranda is not too far away. Okay, next up is by far the most difficult one to grade here, which is Deion Sanders at Colorado. So Deion, I don't think I don't need to introduce Deion Sanders. I don't think. They struggled for a few years there. They struggled his first year there at Colorado. roster was a mess, new coaching staff, all this or whatever, and they just weren't good. Now you go to last year. Shador is one of the better quarterbacks, playing like one of the better quarterbacks in college football. Travis Hunter is maybe the best individual talent we've seen come through college football in the last couple decades. At least, you're talking about Travis Hunter being in the same category of just talent and good at stuff, in the same category as like a Reggie Bush and stuff like that. I mean, he was just that kind of good. He was just that good of a player. But they also had some other good ones. They had a couple of other good receivers and things like that. And the question here with Dion is now, what does he look like now that he doesn't have Shador Sanders at quarterback, and he doesn't have Travis Hunter playing as a Biletnikoff wide receiver in a Thorpe Award defensive back. I would argue that he probably didn't deserve to win the Biletnikoff, but I get why they gave him the trophy. Either way, and and a Heisman winner above all that. So, the question here is, what can they do? They've brought in some talent, as we kind of thought they would. They've been able to recruit. They recruited some decent players at Jackson State. Now they've recruited some big time players. They've recruited some good players into Colorado. They've got good transfers. They've got a 5-star quarterback transfer, or for 5-star recruit. They've got a couple of options at quarterback. But the question is, what happens when they don't have those two guys available to them, and maybe their quarterback isn't accurate enough. Maybe the offensive line still hasn't been rectified. Maybe the defense is still kind of sketchy. I'm really torn on here, because I think Deion Sanders can be a good coach. But right now, his record that we've seen at the Power 5 level is he was bad his first year, and he was good and they were good his second year, and in the title, in the title game hunt. But he was also the beneficiary of one of the best quarterbacks in college football, as well as the best player that college football has seen in the last 20 years. So what does that look like? I wish there was like a C.5 tier here. I wish there was a tier between B and C to account for this, because I think the ceiling for Dion at Colorado is fairly high because of how I think they can recruit there, and the NIL money they've been able to generate, the season ticket sales and all that. There's so much hype around here. But he's only got 2 seasons. And the only good one came with 2 of the best college, players in college football. And there's also the idea that Dion may have his eye on the NFL whenever a job comes open. If the Browns job comes open after this coming season, is Dion going to look to leave and go coach the Browns and coach his son? Maybe. I'm not convinced that he's long for Colorado. I don't think he sees Colorado as a destination. So I think I'm going to put him. I think I'm going to put Deion Sanders in the C tier for right now, because I need to see what he can do without Shador and Travis Hunter available to him. And I need to see what he can do over a multi-year stretch. I think he can be good. And I think that their ceiling is higher with him there than with a lot of other candidates, because of how he can recruit. And it seems like his players really like him. Like, it seems like he is a player's coach, which makes sense. But we'll see. He is a boisterous personality that can rub that can and does rub a lot of people the wrong way. And who knows, maybe he says something dumb in a press conference next year and, turns the donors against him or something. I don't know. There's a lot of red flags with Dion at Colorado that leads me to put him in the C tier, just because I think there's too many red flags for what could go wrong, or he could leave early or whatever. So I think that's where Deion Sanders belongs. All right. Next up, we've got, I believe this is Scott Satterfield. Oh, no, that's not Scott. Yeah, this is Scott Satterfield. No, it's not. It's not Scott Satterfield. Oh, this is Joey McGuire. This is Joey McGuire at Texas Tech. Sorry, they don't. The one thing about the tier maker is they don't let you put captions under the things, so you just have to hope you recognize the picture. This is Joey McGuire at Texas Tech. Now, Joey McGuire is a really interesting guy to look at in this tier list because Texas Tech has become a recruiting machine under him. Their NIL has exploded. Now that helps that Texas Tech has a lot of alumni that are in the oil industry. So they've got a lot of dollars they can throw around, oil dollars that they can throw around at NIL. And he has won games. They've put together some solid teams. However, they have not really broken through yet. We haven't really seen them break through and be a real contender at the top of the conference yet, with Joey McGuire as the coach. That said, I think their roster when he took over was not in good shape. And I think he's done a good job rebuilding it. They need to stabilize that quarterback position. And they lost Taj Boyd, not Taj Boyd. They lost a couple good running backs this year. We'll see. I think this is another one where I think prospectus, I think the prospectus is right now, if you're leaning towards what can happen, the potential, I think he goes into the B tier. If you're going based off of what he's accomplished so far, I think he's closer to C tier. I'm inclined to go with B tier here for Joey McGuire because I think he's done okay. I think he's done a solid job rebuilding that, and if they can get it figured out, and put together a good year, that Texas Tech can be a Big 12 title game contender most years under Joey McGuire, the way he recruits. So I think the prospectus going forward lends itself to him being in that B tier. Next up, we have got Kalani Sitake at BYU. This is another one. I'm so close to putting him. I'm close to putting him. He's not an A tier coach because I think he just hasn't won enough yet here. I think he's very solidly a B tier with, maybe as one of the guys that is most likely to be able to jump up to A tier. He's done a great job at BYU. He's been there for a long time. BYU won a ton of games when they were an independent, and now in their first year in the first couple of years in the Big 12, the first year in the Big 12 they were in a little bit of a transition year roster wise, and they struggled a little bit. Last year, obviously, had a very good season, and arguably had they may have had an argument to be included in the playoff as an at large. And they were in the final group of tiebreakers at the right up to the 11th hour there to make it to the Big 12 title game too. So they were not eliminated that Saturday night until like right before kickoff or something like that, or like the first quarter. They were not, they were in contention into like, I think through kickoff of their game that night. So however, BYU's schedule last season wasn't especially difficult. I mean, they had to play some tough opponents, but they didn't have as difficult a schedule as they could have. And they were also the beneficiary of some bounces. Now they were a good team. I'm not taking that away from BYU at all. They were a good team that had a very good defense. I want to see it. I want to see it again. I want to see BYU be a 9-10 win team again before I'm ready to put Kalani Sitake in the A tier. I think he's earned every bit of that B tier. I think if BYU puts up another 9-10 win football season this year, I'm comfortable moving I'm comfortable giving some real consideration to moving Kalani Sitake up to the A tier. So a lot of respect for him, a lot of respect for the BYU football program. Let's just see a little bit more. Let's see you do it, multiple years in a row. All right, next up is Kenny Dillingham. This is an especially difficult one, especially difficult one to do, because of the small sample size. He is very new to the big, obviously Arizona State's only been in the conference for 1 year, but the 1 year they won the Big 12 title. So it's very difficult to argue with that. I mean, I would, the a Big 12 title win isn't necessarily a requirement to be in the A tier, and it's not necessarily a guarantee that you get in the A tier, is like we saw with Dave Aranda. And it's a small sample size. However, and it's worth noting too, is that they, part of that Big 12 championship was also having a ridiculous player at running back in Cam Skattebo. Now, Cam Skattebo is in the NFL. They've got skill position players returning, and they've got a good quarterback in Sam Levitt. And that's, having good quarterback play is a huge chunk of the recipe to being a consistent football team and being a consistently good football team. But, what can they do when Cam Skattebo isn't at times single-handedly dragging them to wins? We'll see. They can recruit well. I think he can recruit well. We know for a fact that Kenny Dillingham, he even said in a press conference, we know he has followed the Matt Campbell playbook as far as program building goes, making sure your culture is set in stone, recruiting to fit guys that fit your team, that fit your culture, and not just chasing recruiting stars or anything like that. I think the prospectus going forward is very good for Kenny Dillingham at Arizona State. I think he's an A tier. I'm going to put him in the A tier. However, I think he is the weakest of the A tier right now, strictly on the basis of we need to see more of him. He's a 32-year-old head football coach. And, I think Cam Skattebo and Arizona State in general caught a lot of people off guard. Now, granted, they were projected to be one of the worst teams in the conference, and they outdid that. Can't take that away from him. That's why he's in the A tier. However, I think Kenny Dillingham would probably be the one most likely that, if Arizona State is just kind of okay this season, I think he would be the one most likely to drop down to a B tier, just based on, getting more of a sample size in there. All right. Next up is Kyle Whittingham at Utah. So Kyle Whittingham has been at Utah for a very long time. If I'm not mistaken, I believe he was the one that took over for Urban Meyer after Urban Meyer left. He's been at Utah for a long, long time. Has won a lot of games, won Pac-12 titles. Got to the Big 12, and Utah was terrible. They were not a good football team. Their defense was fine, or the defense was solid, above average, maybe good. Offense was atrocious. Utah as a football team was a mess last year. They were not competitive for the entire season. Essentially, they were just not good. And the tricky part here is that the tricky part here with Kyle Whittingham is you're basically having to rank him entirely on the basis of his past resume that he did in the Pac-12 and basically the respect he had, because so far in the Big 12, Utah's been terrible. And we also know that Utah has a coach in waiting, which means that Kyle Whittingham is getting ready to retire. So I will be the first to confess that I'm not necessarily 100% locked into Utah's offseason moves and what they've gotten in the transfer portal and all this, but I don't believe Utah is expected to just jump back up to being a 10-win football program and then all of a sudden, challenge at the top of the conference, right away this season. So, it could be a rough couple first years in the Big 12 for Utah and for Kyle Whittingham. And the question is, beyond that, how long does he stick around? Is this going to be his last year? Is he going to get tired of the transfer portal and NIL and just decide to hang it up? You're like, I don't want to deal with this anymore. And it is what it is. We've already got a coach in waiting. So there's program stability already ready to go. He could just call it quits. I think if you'd asked me this as he was coming into the conference, I think he's a clean and easy A tier. I'm going to slide him in the B tier. And Utah fans will probably not like me for that. But you know what? I also don't care about Utah fans. You guys are assholes. But you will not find a single Utah fan amongst the other fan bases in the Big 12. They did a lot of talking. The fans did an extraordinary amount of talking about how they're going to dominate and they're going to run the league, calling it the gas station conference. And then they come in and get their ass beat their first year. Couldn't be happier to see it. Everybody in the Big 12 was rooting against you. I hope you know that. All right. Next up is Lance Leipold down in Kansas. So Lance Leipold is somewhat similar to Kyle Whittingham in this, except that Kansas is in a better spot as a program than Utah right now. So Lance Leipold came from Buffalo, where he was very good and immediately made Kansas relevant. Immediately. They had offensive coordinator Andy Kotelnick. He led the first few years in that when Kansas's offense was electric. They were putting up points and yards all over the place. Kotelnick went to Penn State, and they replaced him last year. Kansas struggled to start last season. They really struggled to start last season, but by the time October came around, Kansas was, well out of the conference title race. They were really just fighting for a bowl game, essentially the last month and a half of the season, 2 months of the season. And as Iowa State found out, and as many other teams found out, Kansas was white hot in, late October and in November. Nobody wanted a piece of Kansas. Arizona State did not want a piece of Kansas. Nobody wanted to play Kansas. They were one of the best teams in college football the last month and a half of the year. Now, the question is, can they do that for an entire season? Is Jalen Daniels going to be the quarterback that people kind of thought he was thought he could be? I mean, granted, we're going into his fifth or sixth year at Kansas now. What Jalen Daniels, the thought has always been like, well, if Jalen Daniels can stay healthy, then he can do this and this and this. Last year, he stayed healthy. He was inconsistent at times, and at times he was very, very good. Kansas also lost Devin Neal, the all-time leading rusher in school history. They lost a few different receivers, Luke Grimm, Jared Casey at tight end. They lost a lot of playmakers. The offensive scheme is still there. The veteran quarterback is still there. He's still athletic and can still sling the ball around. Does Kansas have the juice to replace all of that they lost? And where they were one of the oldest teams in the conference last year, one of the oldest teams in college football. They were very experienced. And now they lost a lot of that experience, and they're going to be a lot younger this year. Can Kansas, put together that 8, 9, 10 win football season that we thought they were going to do last year? Can they do that? I don't know. But Lance Leipold, being able to turn that program around from what it was, I think is remarkable. Kansas was horrible. But even that first year Leipold, where the record was not very good, there was life in the Kansas football program. Gosh, he's an easy B tier. As an Iowa State fan, I'm a little bit biased. So I kind of want to put him in the A tier because he's kind of had Iowa State's number a little bit. Their offense was basically designed in a lab to beat Iowa State's defense. The start to last year scared me a little bit. I think if they had been good last year, like as good, 8, 9, 10 wins good last year, I think this is a very solid A tier. The beginning of last year scares me a little bit. I think I'm going to put him at A tier. The other question here too with Lance Leipold is how long he's going to be at Kansas. He's an older, he's a little bit older. I'm going to look that up here, but I know he's a little bit on the older side. He is 1964, so he's 61 years old. He's even a few years older than Chris Kleiman is. So you got to wonder how long Lance Leipold is going to continue to be there. It seems like he's got energy, but we also saw like some stuff from last year about how his about, his wife was tweeting or something like that about how he was, she was sick of, not getting support from the fans and all this. But Kansas has a brand new football stadium this year, and it's entirely because of Lance Leipold. I'm gonna put him in A tier just because of where Kansas was as a football program when he took over. It's pretty remarkable how competitive, how quickly he's made them good and competitive. So I'm gonna stick Lance Leipold in there, but I think Kenny Dillingham is more likely to stay in A tier than Leipold. Maybe I don't know. I think Leipold is probably a safer A tier than Dillingham on the just purely on the basis that we've seen Kansas be really competitive and dangerous for a few years now, and they were just coming in just horrible. Now, granted, Kenny Dillingham did not take over a good situation in Arizona State with what Herm Edwards left him, but I'm going to put them both in A tier. But I think they're both potentially have downward movement there just based on what they do this coming year. Next up is Matt Campbell. I understand that this is Iowa State. This is the Iowa State channel at the Voice of College Football Network. We are proud of that. However, and I know I have bias, and I've never been shy about my bias towards Iowa State. However, Matt Campbell is one of the easiest A tiers in this, maybe even ahead of Chris Kleiman. The program he took over was a complete and total mess. He's going into his 10th season now. Is easily he is the winningest college football, winningest coach in Iowa State football history. He is easily the best. He's easily the best coach in college football history, the most important one. He's put together the most successful teams. He's been to the Big 12 title game twice. Hopefully, maybe we can get there this year and finally win one. He's given Iowa State by far the most national relevance it's ever had. He's beaten every team in the conference, before, in the old conference when he had Oklahoma and Texas and all that, he'd beaten every single team in the conference, which had never been done at Iowa State. He has, inspired young coaches. Kenny Dillingham has modeled his approach as a coach after Matt Campbell. And, there's a reason Matt Campbell continuously year after year fields offers from college and NFL programs, college programs, NFL franchises. This is one of the easiest possible A tiers, right alongside Chris Kleiman. I think this is a very easy A tier. He is not leaving this A tier anytime soon. He'd have to have multiple consecutive seasons under 4 wins type of thing, like to even be considered a falling out of this A tier. And I don't think anybody could possibly disagree with that. Some Kansas State fans, I'm sure, would try to find a way to put him in the B tier. But that's just not an honest, I don't think that would be an honest evaluation of Matt Campbell as coach. He's an easy A tier. Very easy. All right. Next up is Mike Gundy at Oklahoma State. So as I teased a little bit at the beginning of this episode, if you're just looking at resume and legacy in the Big 12, Mike Gundy is the easiest A tier. He is by far the easiest A tier on this list. No question. Oklahoma State over the last couple decades is one of the winningest programs in college football. They are they are consistently a dangerous program that even when they are bad, they're still competitive. And there's been times where we thought they were going to be bad, and then they just turn around and they put together a great season like they did in Spencer Sanders last season there. Oh, we got Itamo Outlaw says my IC coverage is nothing short of transcendent. Well, thank you. Anyways, so Mike Gundy is a great coach. He is. He is a very good football coach. However, the question now with Mike Gundy is, what does he do for Oklahoma State going forward? I mean, once he's done at Oklahoma State, he's done. Like maybe he'll go coach high school football someplace and just tear up the Oklahoma high school leagues or something. But at the college level, once he's done at Oklahoma State, he's done. And he's pushing 60 years old now. The "I'm a man, I'm 40" speech was a long, long time ago. We know that he has had some off the field stuff. He's had different comments. He's a very old school guy. He's talked about driving drunk and stuff like this. I don't think he's gotten a DUI or anything like that. but he said, he's been wearing, he's an interesting guy. I think everybody respects his ability to coach a football team. But a lot of times he says things he shouldn't say. He's slow to make coordinator changes when they need to be made. He's slow. He's just generally kind of a slow to change guy. Um, he has not adapted super well to the NIL era. Granted, Oklahoma State as an NIL school isn't as strong as maybe you might think they are, given how their success on the football team, their success on the football field the last couple of decades. I know that a lot of Oklahoma State fans would be just fine. He's earned the right to stay at Oklahoma State as long as he wants, but I think a lot of Oklahoma State fans are ready for him to retire and they want to just move on to the next era. But for that reason, I think that drags him down to a B tier, but absolutely cannot be any lower than a B tier. Just can't be. He's just his resume is too impressive to not to have anything lower than that. And frankly, if someone wanted to come in and make an argument for him as an A tier just based on his resume, I got no problem with that. Like, he's probably the one I could probably like most easily be convinced to throw him in an A tier. But I just think there's a lot of kind of baggage that comes along with Mike Gundy that gives me hesitation to put him up there. All right, next up we have Rich Rodriguez at West Virginia. This is, I believe, the only. Well, actually, there's one of two new coaches in the conference. This is now obviously the second Rich Rodriguez era at West Virginia. He left West Virginia after 2007, so he has not been there for a very long time. He left to go to Michigan, which is a bad stint there. Went to Arizona. I think he had a couple good years there, but then for the most part wasn't awesome. And he's kind of been bouncing around a little bit. And now West Virginia has brought him back, which I know bringing Rich Rodriguez back has kind of reinvigorated the West Virginia fan base that had become very fatigued of the Neil Brown era, which is good. Getting that fan base re-energized and helping improve NIL donations and all that stuff. However, I remain pretty skeptical about this. You got to remember that, what Rich Rodriguez was known for, the reason he got the Michigan job was because of that year in 2007 that they had with, the stretch that they had there with Pat White, Steve Slayton, and guys like that, where they were just, Noah Devine, they were a high flying offense. They were running kind of an options. They were like running like an option run scheme, kind of like Chip Kelly did at Oregon a ways back. And it was an innovative way to approach offense that, because they were doing it out of the shotgun formation with a running quarterback and all this. It wasn't the triple option, but it was a spread running option scheme. It was really fun to watch. Had some, big time athletes that made that happen. However, that scheme is not a novelty anymore. West Virginia does not have players on the roster to make something like that happen. There are, college football defenses now are prepared for stuff like that. They're not defending stuff out of the single back formation, out of the I form anymore, and they're having to adjust to the shotgun. We're completely in the era where everybody runs out of shotgun 95% plus of the time, and these explosive running games, running option and things like that, they are not unique to college football anymore. I don't think Rich Rodriguez has a competitive advantage the way he used to, where he had, a couple really big time athletes at multiple positions and a unique scheme that was a little bit different. It was difficult to defend at the time. A lot of those advantages are gone. Can recruiting step up a little bit there? Kind of maybe, but the problem is that the golden age of Rich Rodriguez at West Virginia happened when these recruits were just coming out of the womb. 2007 was 18 years ago. The kids that he's recruiting now were not born yet when he was at West Virginia. They don't remember Pat White, Steve Slayton, and Noel Devine. They don't remember any of those. So you're having to figure out how to recruit that player now. I remain skeptical on this Rich Rodriguez hire. You know, I'm willing to give him a chance. And West Virginia has a history as a program of being very good, but that was also back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and then obviously 20 years ago. The world's a different place now. West Virginia is a very blue collar fan base. How well can their NIL game keep up? I don't know. Right now, I'm going to put this in the D tier because I remain extremely skeptical of this hire. This feels like Nebraska hiring Scott Frost. Now, granted, Scott Frost did not have a history of winning at Nebraska, but this feels like trying to recapture some old glory to try to make that happen again. I just don't see it. Speaking of the devil, speaking of Scott Frost, here is a guy that has earned his own tier in this rankings because I think he was overrated as UCF's coach. He was horrible as Nebraska's coach, one of the worst they've ever had. Had major issues in Lincoln. I think this is a desperation hire by a program that needs to make a big splash. Maybe this is, I think this has probably reinvigorated their fan base a little bit. A humongous fan base, as far as getting NIL, NIL donations up and stuff like that, because they remember, the glory years when they were, quote unquote, national champions. They were not. But he also did that in the G5. He did that in the American Conference. They're in a Power 5 conference now. They haven't been great in the Big 12. They just lost RJ Harvey. Their defensive line was solid, I think, but like other than that, there's not like a lot of talent returning. They also lost Xavier Townsend, who is now an Iowa State Cyclone. I think this was a terrible hire by UCF. I don't trust Scott Frost as a coach. I don't think this will get UCF pointed in the right direction. Maybe Scott Frost has resolved his personal issues, but I think this was a very terrible hire by UCF. I think they could have done much better hiring from the G5 or something like that than just trying to retread Scott Frost, who is still like a young guy in terms of coaches. But I don't see the upside to this other than just trying to get some more NIL dollars. I really don't see this. I think it was a terrible hire. Let's go ahead and go to next up is Scott Satterfield at Cincinnati. I don't think this has to be a particularly long conversation. I think this is probably a D tier. He's not Scott Frost here. I think this is a D tier coach. Cincinnati has not been good the last 2 years. They were more competitive last year, but they were just kind of bad the last couple of years. Luke Fickell leaving depleted their roster, and I don't think Scott Satterfield's recruiting has recovered to fix that at all. They did bring over Tyson Veit, and he did make their defense better. As defensive coordinator. But right now, I think Cincinnati's got an uphill climb to get back to being, relevant in the conference, among the conference frontrunners. I think they've got a long ways to go. I just don't see this working out long term. I don't think he was good enough at Louisville to justify hiring him away. I think, his entire success wasn't 100% propped up by Lamar Jackson. I just don't see this working out long term. I think Cincinnati is unfortunately bound to be. Unfortunately, I think they're destined to be at the bottom of the conference for a few years until they get rid of Scott Satterfield. But I don't know. We'll see. All right, Sonny Dykes at TCU is both. He's kind of a weird one to rank because he's the only one in this group that has played for a national title in that one crazy season where he had Max Duggan just gutting his team to a national title game appearance where they got blasted by Georgia, but just getting there was really impressive. They beat Michigan, getting there and what he did his first year was really impressive. However, that was Gary Patterson's roster. There wasn't necessarily a big overturn of talent when Sonny Dykes got there. He had the pieces there. But since then, it's been very mediocre for TCU. A lot of people thought TCU might have been able to step up last season and be a dark horse. They just really weren't. They were fine. They were solid, but they weren't great. Um, I think recruiting is an okay spot. The coordinator situation there seems a little unstable, or like not. I don't know about unstable, but just not something's not quite right there. The coordinate with the coordinators. I don't know. I'm not sold on Sonny Dykes. I mean, I don't think TCU fans in general were not sold on Sonny Dykes when they got hired from SMU. I'm gonna put him, this is so strange because, like I said, he played for a national title. I think Sonny Dykes is in the C tier right now. There's too much uncertainty. Like I think everybody recognizes that run was a bit of an aberration, and it was kind of the first year of something different, people not sure what to do with it, and you get a Herculean effort out of your quarterback. I think a lot of I think a lot of people see that as what it was kind of a one-off thing. That doesn't mean they can't be good going forward. TCU's got resources. They're right next to a bunch of recruits. They've got a lot of things working for them. I'm not sold on Sonny Dykes as a coach. I don't think a lot of TCU fans necessarily are. I'm going to stick him in this. I'm going to put him in the C tier with Dion right now because I just need to see what he looks like over the long term. I just think there's a lot of question marks around Sonny Dykes at TCU. Last guy here that I am excited to talk about here is Willie Fritz at Houston. Now, after Dana Holgorsen was fired from Houston or left or whatever you want to call it, Houston's roster was in really bad shape. Not a lot to work with there. Virtually no talent on the roster. Willie Fritz came in from Tulane after going on a really good run with Tulane there. And the Houston's record under Willie Fritz is not great. But if you saw them last season, they were not a team to be like messed around with. That was a team that, especially towards the end of the season, you thought they could come up and bite a couple people. I think he's got that program point in the right direction. Houston has some money that they can get for NIL. I think they're NIL strong. Houston is one of the best metros for recruiting football talent in the country. They've got a lot of things working for them. They've just the hill they have to climb to get there is just such a long and steep one. But I think Willie Fritz is absolutely on the right track. I'm going to put him in the B tier for right now. He's gonna have to put it together like a couple like really good, like legit winning seasons for him to be in contention for the A tier, I think. I mean, if Houston goes 9-3 this year or something like that, we can reevaluate, we can reassess this here a little bit, just because of where Houston was, the program when he took over. But right now, I'm very encouraged by the direction he's got that program. They just need to win. They just need to win more now. They need to win. They need to accumulate wins in a season rather than just looking dangerous. So that's really what's keeping him there for right now. But I do think Willie Fritz is a very good football coach. So to recap, Scott Frost, bad. I think it was a bad hire. I mean, sure. Could UCF prove me wrong? Could Scott Frost prove me wrong and put together something in the next couple of years? Sure. Maybe they could. They have a ton of alumni, and maybe they can get the NIL dollars to get some good recruits in there. I don't know. I'm not a believer. I don't think this will go well for UCF. D tier, you've got Brent Brennan, who hasn't been there very long, so I'm not grading him on a long like resume. But there's just not a lot of energy around the Arizona football program right now to lead me to believe that they're going to be take major steps forward in the next couple of years. The benefit, the good thing they do have is they have a good quarterback, but do they have anybody around him to help him out? That's the question. Rich Rodriguez is, like I said, I'm not necessarily sold on him on trying to recapture that former glory at West Virginia. Maybe we'll see, but I'm not sold on that. Scott Satterfield, I think I don't think he's like in the process of getting fired, but I think, another mediocre or worse season this year. And I think he's on the chopping block in 26. I just don't think there's a lot. I don't think there's a lot going on there for Scott Satterfield at Cincinnati. Next tier up, Dion. Need to see what he looks like as a coach without his son at quarterback and without Travis Hunter at the skill positions. maybe he can be good. I think the recruiting can be good, but we need to see more. Sonny Dykes, again, the national championship run, yeah, but I think there's a lot of doubt around him. That I don't think anybody's really sold on him as a coach at TCU. Dave Aranda won a conference title. Moving up to B tier, Dave Aranda won a conference title. Has had some good seasons, had a couple down years, but I think he's, if he can, I think he's good enough of a coach to keep Baylor in the conversation of being, contender, or at least kind of a dark horse to be in the conference race every year. Joey McGuire has got to prove it. They've got, they can recruit. He's had some good seasons, had some good, had won some good games. Need to put it together for a full season, win 9-10 games or more, stuff like that, and to really convince me. Kalani Sitake, I think, is one or two really good seasons away from moving up into the A tier for me. Kyle Whittingham, I just think the future, there's not a lot of future there. I think just with the coach in waiting, I think, you hope he doesn't become kind of this lame duck coach. I don't think he will. I think his resume is solid enough to, know that he can coach. But what does the roster look like? All that. There's too much uncertainty. Mike Gundy is another one. The resume speaks for itself, but going forward, is he going to cause problems in NIL? I mean, I know they had to renegotiate his contract, so he takes less money that they can put into that. Is he going to continue to say dumb stuff once in a while? That's the question there. But the resume speaks for itself. Willie Fritz is the other direction. The resume, at Houston is, if you just look at wins and losses, isn't awesome, but he's made Houston, worth paying attention to, made them competitive. Just need to see him win football games, and then he can jump up. The A tier feels pretty good to me. Chris Kleiman and Matt Campbell, I think, are 100% easy locks for tier A. They've done it. They've earned their spot. They're going to be there going forward. Lance Leipold, I think, is, we need to see them be more consistent and win when you have expectations. But I think what he's done to turn around Kansas absolutely deserves to put him there. Kenny Dillingham is probably the most exciting, like really young college football coach in the country. Won a conference title his first year. Need to see him follow it up with another good year. He's got the quarterback to play. He's got receivers back. What can he do when he doesn't have Cam Scatterbo, basically? And can he keep that momentum going? I think he can. I think that's why I put him in the A tier. I think the perspectives with him going forward is good. I think Leipold and Dillingham would be the most, in danger of dropping down to the B tier, but I really don't think we're going to see that unless one of them truly implodes this season. So that is my tier list of Big 12 coaches. As you can see, I think the Big 12 has a very good collection of coaching talent, especially at the top. There's really only a couple coaches that I think are kind of lame ducks or unexciting. But for the most part, I think the Big 12 has a very nice collection of coaching talent going forward, and especially young coaching talent too. So I think that, a lot of those names will still be there in 5 years and maybe even 10 years. So everybody, thank you for tuning in. We're going to wrap it up for this week. Thank you for tuning in to our Big 12 coach ranking tier list. If you have any disagreements or agreements or comments to make, please leave them in the comments in the YouTube on this YouTube video. And we appreciate you stopping every single week, both on Twitter and on YouTube. But though I would like to see more on YouTube, so you guys can comment and join in on the discussion. So everybody, thank you for watching, and we will see you again next week here at Iowa State Cyclones Live on the Voice of College Football Network.